All right, guys, we'll go ahead and begin today's class. Before we begin, any quick questions or any concerns at this point? Yes. So for the lit review, the latest I'll have everything back for you guys will be on Thursday of this week, as well as your exams. I'm currently working on your exams and your lit reviews, and I'm hoping that I should have them all done by Thursday of this week. They look good. They look good. As the ones that I've gone through, I haven't really had any major concerns or anything like that. So at this point, we're all doing well. And again, remember, guys, these are. I realize that writing isn't necessarily first nature to anybody at all. So it's always important for us to go through this process. So I'm here to help you guys and help you build your literature reviews to become something better than what it is that they currently are, because we know that we can always improve, and that's part of what we're trying to do for the class. Also, if you guys did notice, and I heard a couple of you mention it, the issues related to your methodology section. The method section will be due on the 23rd. It was supposed to be due on the 14th of this month, but since I moved the date of the lit review, I've also changed the date for the method section. For this week, on your information sheet, I've also gone ahead and put on there that I want you guys to review the video lectures that are already placed on Blackboard for you in regards to your method section. And we'll talk a little bit about the method section in just a couple of moments here after we're done talking about ethics for this week. All right, everyone good? Yep, no worries. Yes, and here again, remember, guys, with your discussion boards, you guys can talk about anything that you want in regards to any topic that you want to discuss related to class. So you can talk about a specific thing that we talked about with ethics. It can be something related to the method section or to the exam from last week. It can be about anything that you want, even something that you may have read in chapter 2 of our textbook. It can be about anything. It is not one thing in specific. Yep, no worries. Any other questions, concerns? All right, so let's go ahead and begin today's lecture. And we're going to talk a little bit about research ethics and about what ethics means to us within the research field. Now, when we think about the term ethics itself, ethics is always this weird thing that we always talk about. It's always a slippery slope. I really wish that ethics was pretty straightforward. If anything, I wish that there was one single definition that we could give for ethics, and we would say this is exactly what ethics is. But in reality, we realize that ethics cannot really be defined by one single statement or anything like that, but rather for each individual person, ethics takes a different shape or it takes a different form. And that's always something that we're always concerned about, because if it were really up to us, and we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, what seems ethical to me may be unethical to another person and vice versa. So one of the things that we always have to consider with the aspects of research is that we always need somebody else to be monitoring what it is that we do and how it is that we do certain things to make sure that we're following the best ethical practices that we can within our limitations that we have. And that's always something that's very important. I've taught classes before about the topic of just ethics. I've taught entire courses about ethics. And one of the things I always tell everyone is the following. Ethics is a slippery slope. There's no right, there's no wrong. It's kind of the perspective of whatever it is that you want to take, but yet we know deep down inside what we would consider to be right and what it is that we would consider to be wrong. So we know that, for instance, shocking a person, yeah, even though we gave people the illusion of doing that with Stanley Milgram's very famous shock experiment back in the 1960s, we necessarily wouldn't want to do something like that in modern times. Even though we're not technically shocking individuals, right, physically shocking them, just the idea alone that we're putting them under that kind of psychological, physical, and emotional stress really does take a toll on the person. And we might say to ourselves, we're not going to want to do that kind of study. And why? Because again, we made that judgment to being able to say, let's not do that anymore. And we all can see that there are some potential problems with that study that might be borderline unethical in those particular instances. So when we think about this term ethics, what does it really mean for us? The best definition that I've ever found for, and again, I'm not 100% happy with this definition, is the one that's here for you on the screen. That ethics refers to the system of moral values by which the rights and wrongs of behaviors are judged. And again, this aspect of right or wrong really depends on the individual. What I view as being right may be wrong to you, and what you view as being wrong may be right to me in that specific instance. So again, there's never this 100% certainty about this is ethical and this is unethical. And like I mentioned last time about some research practices that I've seen some individuals engage in, and even the way that I've offered research experience to some students, right, that I hold their exams not graded yet, and I say, well, your exams are there, but I have this extra credit opportunity. What do you guys think? And much more people are much more likely to participate in that research study at that time. Some people may view that as putting some undue pressure on the participants to want to participate in my research study at that point. But for other individuals like myself, I say, well, that's not really a problem because I'm not telling them that their grades are in my hand and that I'm not going to grade their exams or that they're going to fail because they don't participate, but rather just providing some type of incentive or motivation for them to be able to participate in that way. So when we really think about ethics in terms of research, the idea of applying ethics to research is that all that we want to try to do is try to do things in the right way as best as we possibly can. So in other words, we're trying to keep things in the best interest of the participant while at the same time trying to keep the best interest of the researcher at hand. So what that means is we don't want to hurt the participants emotionally, physically, psychologically, or anything like that. But yet, we want to try to actually get our research study done. So if that means that we may be borderline reaching the point where we may have some type of psychological distress or emotional distress or even physical distress, if we and others consider that to be appropriate and ethical at that time, we're going to be covered. And that's the most important part. If other people view it as being ethical and they're the ones who govern the research study that you're doing, we're going to be okay. And what I mean by that is our institutional review board, or what we call our IRB, that institutions generally tend to have. So here, if that governing agency says, yes, you can do your research study based on the situation and the parameters that you've given us, and that's what we follow to the T whenever it is that we conduct our research study, no matter if someone complains about our work or doesn't complain about our work or tries to sue the university or not, it doesn't matter because the IRB has our back. Everyone with me? Perfect. So the idea of having ethical standards really needs to be applied to human participation, but we should never exclude animal participation. And this is very, very important, that animals as well as humans have rights, and we need to follow ethical practices with animal care as well. And one of the things that you'll find as we talk about ethics in different contexts of human versus animal participation, you'll find that with animal participation, sometimes our ethical guidelines are even more rigorous than what it is that we actually have for humans. And one of the reasons for that is because in animal research, depending on what we do, we may actually have to end the life of the subject in that particular instance, the life of the animal. So here, one of the things we will definitely talk about with regards to animal ethics is why it is that we have to use animals for some situations and what it is that we have to do with the animals after the completion of the studies. Any questions before we continue? Perfect. So what does the APA tell us about doing research in general, or about the APA Code of Conduct in general? So the American Psychological Association has essentially given us 5 guidelines that we all need to follow. And they're all labeled as Principle A, B, C, D, and E. Principle A states the following, that we have benefits and non-malfeasance. What does that mean? It essentially means that as researchers, one of our primary goals is to weigh the benefits and the limitations associated with our research studies. So one of the key things that we should always do is we should look at the cost, we should look at the benefit associated with our study. If the benefits outweigh the cost, we're generally going to be okay to do the research study. It's when the costs outweigh the benefits, that's where we end up having a little bit of a problem. This is what we call the cost-benefit analysis. So us as researchers should all sit down prior to ever sending our work to get approved by somebody else, in other words, the IRB. We should always sit down with our work and we should look at our work and evaluate it and say, What are the costs and what are the benefits associated with my study? And when I say cost, some of those costs may be monetary cost or resource cost. But here when I say cost, I really mean, is it cost to the participant? Physical, emotional, psychological well-being. Those are major costs that we always have to consider. It's once those costs outweigh the benefit of the research study where we start now becoming concerned and saying, we can't do the research study because the costs are outweighing the benefits, and we're going to have too much risk in our study to being able to outweigh those benefits that we're looking at or that we're looking for. Now, I will say this. As researchers, do you think that my costs ever outweigh my benefits? Absolutely not. I never think that the costs associated with my research studies outweigh my benefits. My benefits always outweigh my costs. And that's an inherent bias that all researchers have. If you were doing a research study, no matter what it is that you're doing, you're going to look at that cost benefit analysis and you're going to say to yourself, man, my benefits, I'm going to learn so much about this topic. The field is going to benefit so greatly from doing this kind of work and so on and so forth. Yeah, I may be shocking people and imprisoning them and causing a lot of psychological and physical and emotional distress in them, but they'll be fine. It's not a problem. We'll regulate their emotions and their behavior and it'll be fine because what we're going to learn is going to be super important. And that's kind of the issue that we always tend to find. That if it was up to us, everything we would always do and anything we would ever want to do would always be considered ethical. That's why we leave that task up to others to evaluate our work and make the decision if we are being ethical or not in terms of our research studies. Everyone with me? Perfect. Our second principle, principle B, the issue related to fidelity and responsibility. Fidelity and responsibility states the following. Researchers are responsible members of society, and we must uphold high standards of conduct in terms of our work. Now, this means something very important for us because if we're going to look here at this issue associated with society, now this doesn't just mean my scientific community or my scientific society or anything like that. This means society as a whole. It means a larger population, the real world. We as researchers have a responsibility to society to do good quality work. We are responsible members of that society that we always uphold the rules and regulations given to us by our association. In other words, by the APA. So if the APA is telling us that we should be honest individuals, that we should be accurate individuals like Principle C tells us in terms of integrity, we should be truthful individuals. We, as good practicing members of society, should hold the rules associated with what APA tells us out in society, not just in our institutions or our place of employment. We're always walking in the shadow of psychology. Everyone with me? This means also that whenever it is that we're conducting research, we're doing research for the benefit of society. We're not doing research for ourselves, that we're doing the research study because we're going to be gaining a monetary reward or anything like that. Now, granted, grants may come associated with us doing research. Recognition, fame, whatever it is that you want may come with some of the work that you do. But the reason that we do the research studies is because we're trying to learn and discover new things related to society and trying to help out if a specific issue is trying to be tackled in the case of applied research, for instance. Or that we're doing basic research and what we're trying to do is understand and further our understanding of that specific phenomenon of interest. So what we need to do is always keep in mind, how is this going to benefit our society? And that's actually part of what we do in all of our research studies. We sit down and we say, what's the overarching benefit of my study? Many years ago, I had a student tell me one time, was an undergraduate student, I would have them write in their research papers, what's the benefit of your research study? And the student wrote, I have no benefit. And I was like, that is incredible. Like, I had never thought of that in my life, that a student would ever say, there's zero benefit with me doing this research study. Like, for this person, I guess the only benefit was, I'm getting this done and off my plate, and I'm going to get a grade and I can continue on. I'm just done. And I sat down with the student and I said, okay, you're doing this research study. Why is it important that you're doing it? Because you told me that I had to do it. Yeah, okay, I guess. And finally, it took me about 15, 20 minutes to really get the idea across to the student that it's about us doing it for a greater good. right? In this particular case, that we're doing it not because, again, we're trying to make the world a better place, but because we're trying to understand human behavior out there in the real world. And how is that research study going to be helping us understand something that we didn't yet know? And it took a while, but once it was that that person figured that out, it helped them through the process of doing the research study, because now everything that they did fit into that mindset of, I'm doing it for society. I'm doing it to better our understanding associated with this phenomenon or for our understanding of human behavior. And it helps guide us in that specific direction. Questions up to now? Perfect. Principle C, the issue associated with integrity, being accurate, honest, and truthful. We as researchers hold a very, very important role in terms of science. And part of that role is that we need to make sure that the work that we're sending out to other individuals is accurate. It's the best work that we can possibly do. It's honest. The data collection and the procedures are accurate and honest in the way that we've actually done the research studies. And last, that they're truthful. So in other words, the conclusions that we draw are based on the real data and not fabrications. In statistics, we always say there's lies, there's damn lies, and then there's statistics. And the reason we say that is because statistics are so easily manipulatable that we can make them look like whatever it is that we want. And we have many, many cases, guys, where we actually see this happen at a professional level, at a collegiate level, where faculty members feel the pressure to publish, they feel the pressure to produce, and they'll do anything to get their work published and out there into the community so that way they can get tenure, they can get reappointments, they can get grants, and they'll go so far to fabricate data, they'll go so far to not even collect data and just write anything to make it look like it's something important, something impactful, so that way they can get it published and we can continue on and they can have a job. That to us is hurtful as a scientific community. Why? Absolutely. So now other people in the field are going to get discredited because of your dishonesty in this particular case. And now people are going to have less validity in terms of the work that we do within that field. Absolutely. What else? Absolutely. 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 So you could be harming the person. The person could be involved in another technique that is actually effective, and so on and so forth. So all of these things, imagine, just to get your work published, just so that way you can keep a job, just so that way you have fame, that way maybe you can have fortune and you can have grants or whatever it is that you want. And you do all those things just for yourself in a selfish fashion. Again, it goes back to the issue of fidelity and responsibility. That we have a responsibility to society, we have a responsibility to our community as a science as well, and also to the larger population. So it goes beyond us just saying, hey, it's hurting all of us within the community, but it also may be hurting other people out there in the real world because of the effect that our results may have. And remember, this goes back to something we've talked about. Do the results of our studies have a real world impact? And the answer is yes. We never know who's going to take our word or our work and use it in a real world setting, and that actually may be a disaster because we haven't done our job accurately. Questions so far? Perfect. Principle D, our fourth principle, the issue of justice. Researchers must treat others with fairness, and we must always maintain our expertise. One of the things that you guys will find, once it is that you have your certifications, your licensures, you're ready to go out there and practice, one of the things that you guys will be required to do quite often is do CE courses. So your continuing education courses. And one of the reasons that you're required to do that is because of this specific principle right here. The state and at the national level, we've all recognized that one of the things that we need to do is always maintain our levels of expertise. So how do we do that? You have to continue to go back to take classes, learn new techniques, learn the updates of what the state says about specific drugs or about techniques or about HIPAA or OSHA or whatever the case may be. And you learn information and it maintains your expertise in your specific subfield or your specific discipline in that specific instance. For us as professors, for instance, I don't have to do CE courses. And one of the reasons I don't have to do CE courses is because it's assumed that it's built into my ability to teach courses. That if I'm teaching a class, that must mean that I'm still continuing to keep up to date with what's actually new out there in the field, that I'm an expert in the field because I continue to read journal articles, that it's like if I'm doing continuing education. Everyone with me so far? Perfect. And part of doing that aspect of maintaining our expertise is because we want to treat other people with fairness and with respect. Part of what we want to try to do is we want to try to treat everybody equally, especially if it's in a research situation and we're not doing something that's a manipulation. So just because I'm having a bad day, for instance, right? So let's take, for example, Eric, you mentioned that, I came in, and where's the smile, doc, And you're absolutely right. Yeah, how is that your fault in that specific case that I don't come in with the smile? I have to change my mindset around. I have to say, you know what? Now this is my outlet. This is where I'm going to have fun. I'm going to come in and I'm going to talk about these specific topics. And one of my friends that I used to have in college used to always say, you got to wrap you got to put your problems in a little brown paper bag, wrap it up, and leave it outside the door, and then come in. Because he didn't want to deal with your issues. Because how was he responsible for your problems that you were having with your significant other or at home or whatever the case was? And he was 100% right. You have to treat everybody equally, unless you're a researcher and you're trying to do different manipulations in that particular case. So you're supposed to treat this group different from this other group. But here you always have to maintain that fairness. You always have to give everyone your 110% because that's what they deserve, because then it relates to our last principle associated with respect for people's rights and also for their dignity. Part of what we do as researchers is always make sure that we treat all our participants, all our students, all our clients with the best respect, with the highest levels and degrees of respect and fairness, because they are there for the purpose of helping us. Participants come in, they're there to help us. Patients are there to also help us, even though we're providing a service to them. They're also there to provide something to us. That may be a monetary reward that we're receiving from them, but we're still there for them as well. And they're there for us in those particular cases. And part of that commitment that we make to them is that we're going to maintain information private. We're going to maintain information confidential or anonymous. What's the difference between confidential and anonymous, guys? What's confidentiality? Okay, so here with the aspect of confidentiality, you know who that person is, you know identifying information associated with that person, and what you're saying is, I promise not to disclose any information related to your identity that may be linked back to you. Everyone with me? Perfect. What's anonymity? So with confidentiality, all that we're saying is, I may disclose some information, but I'm not gonna say it's you. I'm not gonna give any identifying information. Exactly right. And with anonymous, we're saying, I may disclose information, but I don't know who this person is in any capacity. I don't have any identifying information. Everyone good? So with confidentiality, you do have identifying information. With anonymity, you don't have any identifying information. So we may keep information confidential. We may say, this is confidential information. I may talk about this specific issue or about this specific case or use your data, but I'm not going to disclose that this is your information. With anonymity, we're saying we may talk about the information, but there's no way for us to even know that it was you or not. Everyone good? Perfect. In research, we very rarely, if ever, guarantee anonymity. Most of the time, 99.9% of the time, we ensure confidentiality because we will use their information for publication purposes or for presentation purposes, but we're promising that we're not going to disclose the identifying information related to who you are. And where is it that we keep this individual's information? We keep it on the informed consent. Participants sign their names on the informed consent. So we automatically have an identifier for that participant. Everyone with me? Perfect. We also must always respect the culture, the background, the individual, and the role differences that they have. So we need to understand what the role is as a clinician, as a professor, as a researcher, and we also need to understand what the role is of a patient, a participant, or also as a student. We always have to understand what the roles are because it's very easy for us to have a power difference that may exist because of the situation. So it's very easy for a professor to tell students to do certain things that have no benefit at all for them and that does not respect any quality as to what their learning environment is all about. That very easily happens. We want to avoid doing that kind of thing just because we have that ability. I used to have a professor many, many years ago who he used to do that. He used to place undue pressure on his students. And he would tell you, I can give you anything that I want for you to do just because I'm the professor and I have that authority. And you were like, what are you even talking about? Like, don't waste my time, right? So here, what do you have to do? You have to have that relationship and understand what the differences in terms of the role are and understand that in some instances you have the power and in other instances you may not have the power, but there always has to be that mutual understanding and respect for each other. The culture, the religion, the individual differences of individuals are very important for us always to keep into consideration. This is why we try to not talk so much about political affiliation or political issues or talk about social issues or that we talk about sensitive topics in some particular instances. And why? Because it's always important for us to respect each other's views and religions because we understand that each one of us has different views and different religions and different cultures, especially in our modern day society. Everyone good? Perfect. Now, this is all good and dandy, right? That we say, oh, this is awesome. We got our 5 principles here. That's fantastic. Who should be keeping an eye on us? And one of the key committees that should be keeping an eye on us is the IRB. Now, with me saying that the IRB should be the one who are monitoring you, it's not always a guarantee that the IRB is always keeping an eye on you. And part of what we're tasked to do by the American Psychological Association is to monitor each other. So in other words, if there was something, for instance, that you observe, that you say, hey, that's not right. I think that's unethical behavior. So for instance, let's say that I would come into class and all of a sudden I would start bashing a specific religion or a specific political affiliation or a specific ethnicity or whatever the case may be. And I just start going on and on and on in a rant. It's your responsibility as an active member of the American Psychological Association to report that unethical infraction. Now, should you automatically go and report that unethical infraction to the American Psychological Association? And the answer is no. Technically, the first step is coming and talking to me and saying, hey, these things happened while you were lecturing. I don't feel that you were respecting everybody's culture, everybody's religion, everybody's right to be. And then if we can't sort it out, you then move up to the next level. But here, that's something that every one of us should be monitoring. And that goes even for professors, for researchers, for students, and for other faculty. Because it's all our responsibility to maintain a high degree of expectations and ethical behavior into the American Psychological Association. The IRB is there to help us maintain ethical behavior and ethical standards within our research practices, but they're not there to view every single behavior that we do. Everyone with me so far? Perfect. So part of what we need to do as good researchers is we need, like I mentioned before, someone to oversee our work, because we realize that if it was up to us again, we would never have any unethical work that we've ever done. We'd be going all crazy and we'd be doing a whole bunch of Milgram shock experiments. We'd be going off and doing the Stanford prison experiment all over again and all of these different things all the time. But in reality, we realize that we can't be doing those kinds of things. And the IRB monitors that. Now, who's the IRB? The IRB is a committee that the university selects based off of different members of the university in terms of faculty, staff and administrators, and also community members. Very, very important. We have to have a mix of everyone. Why do you guys think that we should have a mix of everyone? Absolutely. Having different perspectives. Why else? Absolutely, like a checks and balances as well. So everyone keeps the best interest of each one of the sections. So for instance, you have some faculty members. The faculty members are looking out for the faculty members' best interest as well. Faculty members want to do research. But you have this other group of individuals, let's say administrators, who say, no, 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 what they're doing, that's not ethical. The faculty members are there to say, hey, you know what? But this is the reason why we do those kinds of things. Or administrators may say, yeah, we're good to go. But someone from the community, someone from society may come in and say, you know what, guys, we understand that for research purposes for a university, this is very important, but this is very sensitive topics that may affect us at a community-based level. So now, for instance, you're going to go out and you're going to create this intervention technique out in the community. You're going to go and offer services outside of Walmart to the community, free of charge, everything like that. And you want to see if these different types of intervention techniques are going to be as effective, or there are going to be some differences between the techniques. That affects the community at a larger level. But now, for instance, if you go in and you may hurt the community, we need people from society to be able to say, hey, you know what? That may be a problem for us. So here, let's make sure that the work that we're doing is going to be the best quality work that we're doing and implementing that into society. Everyone with me so far? Now, this also creates a problem for us as researchers because not everyone is an expert in our specific field. Like I mentioned, there are people who are designated from the faculty, from administration and staff, and also from the community. People within the community may not have the level of expertise as to what a faculty member from psychology knows related to the psychological topics. Faculty members within the university are all non-experts within each other's fields. So for instance, I cannot be an expert and evaluate the work associated with what a clinical psychologist is doing. I know the basics of understanding in terms of ethics, research, statistics, and so on and so forth. I can do that. But in terms of the theory, I may not be able to do that. But other people may be able to do that. So one of the things that we always find with IRB committees is that there's always kind of this pulling back and forth as to what is ethical and what's not ethical, and why should you be doing this work and what should you not be doing. As an example, I'll give you this. Many years ago, when I was at another university, I wanted to do a research study in memory. And one of the things that we cannot do in memory research is we can't tell you that we're going to give you a memory task. Everyone with me? Perfect. And why can't I tell you that we're going to give you a memory task? Why can't I do that? Absolutely. So you're going to be trying really hard to memorize everything. From the moment I tell you that there's going to be a memory task, that second you're going to start trying to learn everything. And that may mess with my results. So if you start trying to memorize from the point of the informed consent all the way through the debriefing, by the time you actually pass the informed consent, you're already starting to get fatigued, your answers start changing. So I was going to do this study, and I mentioned in the application that we were not going to be telling them that. And I get this email back from the IRB, and it says, we're really sorry, but we're denying your application for IRB because you're not being truthful to your participants about the procedures that you're going to be undertaking. So I replied back and I said, look, this is standard protocol, so on and so forth. And they replied back and said, we understand that that's standard protocol, but unless you do that, we are not going to allow you to do it. So the good thing was that the person who was one of the individuals who was on the IRB committee was actually a faculty member in the psychology department. And he wasn't there at the meeting when they evaluated my work the first time, and they had voted without him. But the second time it went up, and I again submitted it, he was there and he said, you know what, guys, this is actually the standard practice. Here are all the rationales why we do this. He's exactly right. We can approve this. And they said, okay, fine. And they approved it. But if it wasn't for that person, it would have never gone approved. And that's sometimes what happens with research studies, that we assume that they're just going to understand why we're doing things. That's not always a guarantee. Sometimes we need to be there with the IRB to give them a little push and say, this is why we're doing it. This is why we write manuscripts as well. When we submit to the IRB, we generally attach evidence that backs up in a theoretical fashion why we're doing these types of methodologies or why we're doing these types of empirical data collection procedures. So that way they understand that it's not just because we want to do it and we want to hide things from our participants or whatever the case may be, but rather we're doing it for a good rationale. Everyone with me so far? Perfect. So when we look at the IRB again is interested in this whole idea of the checks and balances, the benefit and the limitations, or the benefit and the cost associated with your research study. So they again will do a cost-benefit analysis. Now granted, the cost-benefit analysis is no specific formula or anything like that. It's just kind of a subjective kind of analysis that they do. But they look at all experiments that are dealing with human participation, and that needs to be made very clear. IRB only deals with human participation. Okay? Only with human. They don't deal with animals. Another committee will do that, and we'll talk about them in just a bit. So the IRB will only deal with human participation, and they're going to look to make sure that everything is okay with your research study. Once it is that all procedures are in compliance with what they want you to be doing, and again, they may ask you for some modifications or whatever the case may be, if they okay it, you're good to go. And part of what they'll do is they're going to divide up the results of your cost-benefit analysis, and they're going to say, is there risk involved or is there no risk involved? And most of the time, everyone falls under the category of risk. Because in any research situation, there's always very minor risk. But again, that risk may be so minor that again, the benefits outweigh that cost that we're seeing in that specific situation. And that's very important for us to understand. Very rarely do we never have any risk associated with the research study. Now, one of the key issues that they're going to want to look at is the issue associated with deception. Deception is a huge, huge part of wanting to make sure that we treat our participants with respect and with dignity. And part of that aspect of dignity and respect is making sure that we're not lying to them. And that's what deception is all about. The aspect of withholding information, or we flat out lie to them. Now, there's two different types of deception. We have what's called passive deception and active deception. With passive deception, this is where I don't really even like to call it deception, but I will because it's called passive deception. But with passive deception, think of it like a little white lie. We're withholding some information and we're not exactly telling you 100% the truth. Everyone with me? Perfect. That's passive deception. So here, hey, you know what? We're going to give you a bunch of papers to fill out. We're going to give you some stimuli to view, but we're not going to tell you that we're going to actually give you a memory test at the end. That's technically considered passive deception. Automatically, there is a risk involved because you're lying to them in some capacity. Everyone good? Active deception, on the other hand, is where we flat out lie to them and we deceive them to the 100% extent that we can. So in other words, we tell them that they're going to be doing a memory task when in reality we're looking at prejudice levels. So we're doing something completely different than what it is that we're saying that we were intending to do. Everyone good? That's active deception, absolutely. Questions, concerns up to this point? Perfect. So why is it then that we have IRBs? And one of the questions that generally comes up a lot is the following. Are all universities or all institutions required to have an IRB? And the answer is depends. And it depends on the following. If a university or an institution receives federal funding from the United States government, let that be through grants, let that be through financial aid, student loans, etc., etc., etc. If the university or the organization is receiving federal funding, they automatically have to have an IRB. Everyone with me so far? Perfect. So if you're not receiving federal funds from the government, in whatever capacity it may be, you're not required to have an IRB, but it's a good recommendation to always have an IRB who says, hey, we're looking out for your best interest and for the best interest of the organization as well. Questions up to now? Everyone good? Perfect. Okay, so with the IRB, one of the major issues that we always want to look at is wanting to make sure that we provide enough guidance and also that we're there to help you in any case that you need the help of the IRB. So in case a participant were to come to you and say, hey, I'm very upset about the content of the experiment. I'm very upset about the way that I was treated during the experiment. I'm upset about the language that was used during the experiment. I'm going to sue you. I'm going to sue the university. I'm going to get you fired. And it's because of your research study. If you followed the protocol and the guidance by what was given to you by the IRB, what was approved, you have nothing to worry about. All you do is you continue on with your daily life at work. Why? Because the IRB said it was okay. If the IRB said it was okay and you're doing something else other than what the protocol says, and that's why they're getting mad and that's what they're going to target, now you're in trouble. Everyone with me so far? Very, very important. What's the worst thing that can happen to you if you don't follow what the IRB tells you to follow, or you don't get IRB approval? You can get fired. You can get your grants taken away. You can get blacklisted. You can get sued by those individuals. You can get sued by the universities because you're not following the protocols that were given to you, and we assume that you're following the correct protocols. Everyone with me so far? Very, very important. And in the case where a participant or a patient, for instance, might get upset at you and you're doing some research with them and they say, hey, you know what, I'm going to go and I'm going to sue you, I'm going to sue the university, more than likely the IRB will call you and just be like, hey, you know what, hold off on doing some research while we get this all sorted out. Let's see what happened. Once they get it all sorted out, pick it back up right where you left off, because they say, don't worry, you're fine, we'll deal with them. Universities have their own set of lawyers and their own set of issues that they'll deal with that person, and they'll take it from there, but you don't really have to worry about it. Everyone good? Perfect. So again, very important that we're in the good graces of the IRB at all times. So why is it then that we care so much about human participation and the treatment of humans? And the real answer is the following. We haven't always, within the field of science as a whole, not just within psychology, but it's science as a larger field, we haven't always kept the best interests of humans at hand. We haven't always treated all humans equally. For many, many years, many decades, for many centuries, we have discriminated against people. Let that be because of their ethnicity, their race, their gender, their country of origin, the language that they speak. Whatever the rationale may be, people were discriminated. And in many instances, those individuals that were discriminated upon were used for participation purposes without their consent and without their knowledge of what was actually happening. So in the few times that they were told that they were going to be participants in a research study, they weren't told the correct methodology that was being used, and they weren't told that they were going to be receiving things that were going to be hurtful to them. So, for instance, in the case of the atrocities that happened during World War II in Germany, those things, the research that was done in the Holocaust was horrific. We all can agree to that. The knowledge that we gained because of the work that was done during the Holocaust, we've gained a lot of knowledge. Unfortunate knowledge, to be honest with you. We gained a lot of knowledge, but yet the atrocities that we made those individuals go through were terrible and should have never been done. Everyone with me so far? Because of what happened during the Holocaust, afterwards, we created the first American Psychological Association Code of Ethics that stemmed from the Nuremberg Code. The Nuremberg Code comes from the Nuremberg trials, the trials where Nazis were put on trial for the atrocities that were done towards Jewish individuals. From that trial, the code was developed for general human treatment. As a whole, across the entire planet, this is the way we assume humans should be treated. From that, the American Psychological Association built and created their own standards of practice for human participation. And the very first research studies that were ever done within the field of psychology were actually done with the researchers themselves. Researcher and participant were the same individuals. So for instance, Hermann von Ebbinghaus was one of the most famous memory researchers that we have within the field of cognitive psychology. He was his own participant. So one of the good things about that was that he was never late to a research study. It's a terrible joke, I know. I'm sorry. Right now. It's one of those psychology jokes, right? But he was his own participant, and that was fantastic because he knew what was in the best interest. He knew he wasn't going to put himself through terrible things. So we used ourselves as our own participants. But then we wanted to continue to expand and collect data with others and collect data on a more larger scale. Because one of the things that we've talked about is this issue related to samples and populations, that we want to get representative samples from the population. We know we can't get the whole population, but if we can get a large number of participants to come in and participate, that's going to give us a good representation of what the population should look like. So what did we resort to? We resorted to getting more people to come in and participate. And one of the easiest ways for us to do that was through convenience sampling, through getting psychology students to come in and participate. Many research studies, and I would even predict that the number's even higher now. Some of these numbers may be a little bit outdated, between 70 to 85%. We're even talking about larger numbers now, thanks to the use of the internet and internet participation. Some of those instances for universities to participate electronically. We even have larger samples coming in from college-age students from general psychology courses. And again, we do so uncaringly at this point, that we collect data through them because that's one of the largest pools of data participation that we actually have that come from our college students. So very important for us. So again, we now started to continue to expand the code of ethics because now we started using college students. What kinds of incentives could we hold over their head? Could we not hold over their head in those kinds of particular situations? Questions up to now? Perfect. Now, like I've mentioned before, part of the treatment of participants is understanding that there's going to be a clear power difference that we have between a participant and also a researcher, or a clinician and a patient, for instance, in those particular situations where you may be collecting data, or you may be implementing some type of intervention technique. So since that power difference occurs and it exists at a very high level, we have to understand that part of the pressure that we're putting on our participants or on our patients may be undue pressure. And we're going to want to try to reduce that to the best of our abilities. So in an academic setting, for instance, grades are a big concern for our participant. So here we hold extra credit over their head, or we hold the completion of a course, or we hold their grade over their head and we say, you're never going to get your grade unless you come in and participate in my research study. Or your participation in the research study is going to then dictate whatever grade you get. If you don't participate, you're going to get an F, or you're going to get a D, or you're going to get a B, or whatever the case may be. So here in an academic setting, we may hold their grades over their head, and again, we may do so unintentionally, but yet we still do it uncaringly in some of those instances. And again, we have to find the right justification as to why it is that we're doing it. Money as a pressure component is a very big motivational factor for some of our participants as well. They rather choose to participate in a research study that they're going to get paid for versus a research study where they're going to get something like extra credit, because money is going to be a lot more tangible than just having extra credit that only benefits them in one specific fashion. Now, this aspect of money can also lead our participants to feeling the pressure to always have to be there to participate. They may not want to, but since money's being held over their heads that if you don't complete all 3 sessions, you're not going to get your money, when in reality, for every single session that they participate in, they should be receiving their incentive. So if they're going to get, let's say, $75 for participation, and you're going to make them go to 3 sessions, after each session, they should get one of the incentives. So they get $25 every single time until they've exceeded their amount of reward that they were supposed to be receiving, or they've completed the experiment at that specific time. Everyone good? Perfect. Now, this all sounds great and dandy, and in many instances we have people tell us, well, why do you even use incentives at all? Why not just have participants come in out of their own free will, altruistically? Yeah, right. It's not going to happen. Imagine going into a general psychology class and being like, hey guys, look, I really need participants. You know, if you come in, it's really going to help you benefit personally. You're going to feel better about yourself. Yeah, right. And no one's going to come in. You're going to be sitting there twiddling your thumbs all day and no one's ever going to show up. But rather, we turn to incentives and we say, hey, okay, look, we've tried the altruistic motives, did not work. I had a professor who would say that altruism doesn't exist. He was a researcher, as you can imagine, so he always believed very firmly in terms of giving specific compensations and specific incentives to our participants. And we also have to think about what our role is as a psychologist. Many of us have that stereotype being given to us about what a psychologist is and what it is that we do in a daily living. So, for instance, your family and your friends probably assume that all you're doing is that you're analyzing them all the time. You're reading their minds. You're trying to tell them about their mommy and daddy issues. What? No, we're not doing that. My family, for instance, my dad doesn't understand what it means to be a psychologist. My dad still thinks that I have patience. And I'm like, Dad, I'm not a clinician. I teach for a living. And he's like, oh, yeah, you see a lot of patients, don't you? Yeah, Dad, that's exactly what I see. And still to this day, he thinks that part of the requirement of being a psychologist is that you have to do drugs. Absolutely. That's what he thought. He told me when I told him I was going to be a psychologist, he's like, oh, so now you're going to be doing drugs. And I was like, what? Like, is that a requirement? Like, I wasn't aware of this. And he was like, yeah, to understand and to treat them with their drug addictions, you have to try the drugs so that way you understand them. And I was like, I guess so. I don't know. Mm-hmm. It's like, what drug are you on? Hold on, I'll be right back. Let me go try, see what happens. So people come in with the stereotype about what we do. And to be honest, we kind of promote that stereotype in most instances as well. And we do sometimes do it jokingly, and other times we do it because it's the way that we have to talk about our profession. In general psychology, for instance, if we were to go in and talk about research methods and statistics in general psychology, you think we'd get any psych majors? No. They'd be like, stats? I'm out of here, man. Get out of here. It's once they declare, then we tell them, oh yeah, and by the way, you got to take stats and research methods, right? So here, what do we end up doing in general psych? We talk about all the cool stuff, right? We talk about disorders, we talk about addictions, we talk about all these crazy research studies that we've done, locking people up in pseudo prisons and shocking them and so on and so forth. And people are like, wow, you see, that's what a psychologist does. And they see us with all our crazy hair and beards and they think we're all crazy. And we're not. I still remember my very first participant in my very first research study. This large gentleman. He was a football player in high school. I mean, just big guy. Came in sweating up a storm. I was so excited to have my first participant. I said, come on in, sit down. And the guy was like, oh, okay. And he kept like looking around the room, all like really kind of, wanting to make sure nothing, like no booby traps or something. And I was like, are you okay? And he goes, when you shock me, you have to tell me, right? And I'm like, what? And I'm like, no, man, no one's going to shock you. And he's like, wait, because you have to tell me if you're going to shock me. Like, you just can't do it. Like, I know my rights. Okay. So I said, okay, man, don't worry. And he was sweating profusely, a lot. And he was shaking. I mean, his pen couldn't even stay still. So I gave him the informed consent, and he was shaking the paper while he was reading it. And he couldn't even read. And he was like, oh, man, I'm really, really nervous. And I was like, so you really think I'm going to shock you? And he was like, yes, because that's what we've learned, that you all do these crazy studies where you give people drugs and you shock them and you don't. Oh, man, I got really concerned. And I thought to myself, am I really going to shock this guy? Am I supposed to? Like, did I forget it? Did I forget to bring my cattle prod? I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. So I had the computer in front of him, and what he was supposed to do was read a sentence, and then all he was supposed to do was answer yes or no to the sentence. That was it. Nothing more. And it was about 100 sentences that he had to read, and that was it. And as soon as I opened up the laptop in front of him, he freaked out. Oh man, I can't do this. I can't do this. I gotta go. I gotta get out of here. I can't sit. I was like, okay, calm down. I let him sit for a little bit. I gave him some water, and I said, you know what? You're free to go. Don't worry. And he got up and left. Oh man, how'd I do? How'd you do on what? And in my mind, I'm just amazed that he would still think that he was still in the experiment. And I said, no worries. You're all done. Thanks. You're ready to go. You're going to get your credit. And he left. And I thought to myself, why did he think that? So I went and talked to the professor of that class where that student came from. And the professor goes, oh, it's because I freaked him out because I told him that you were going to shock him. He's like, we had just talked about the Milgram experiment, and then you came in and offered your extra credit opportunity, and I was like, oh, be careful, he's probably going to shock you. What are you doing? He ruined the whole class for me, so I couldn't use them. I couldn't use those participants at all. And why? Because they had that stereotype that that's what we would do. And he, as the professor, was just like, dude, I was trying to help out, just make it interesting to them so that way they want to go. He had the opposite effect. So when you think about that power struggle that we have with our participants, we do hold a sense of power over them. And that's exactly what the whole purpose of the Milgram research study was about authority. That you could have this researcher in that situation hold a degree of power over the participant and force them to do things that they didn't want to do. In this particular case, having the illusion that they were shocking another participant. So we see clearly that we can have power and that we can ultimately create a situation where we want them to behave in a specific fashion. And that's also where the issue of a demand characteristic comes in, where we essentially push our participants to behave in a specific fashion. We push them to give us the answers that we're looking for to support our predictions. And that's not what we should be doing. Because what we should be doing is hoping that our participants give us their natural own responses, their honest responses. And if we're pushing them or we're making them have this feeling of authority being placed over them, that's where things are going to go wrong and you're not going to get the right results. Everyone with me so far? Perfect. All right, guys. I have on my watch 5:01. Let's take a little bit of a break. Let's take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back to class for our second part of class. Everyone good? Perfect. Let's take a little bit of a break. All right. So you guys were a little bit too excited on that one. I'm going to be honest with you. You're like, we're done. We're done with this. We're done. No, that's not, I did not take it personally. I thought it was ethics that was the issue. So, well, I will tell you guys this. I am actually quite excited that I'm going to go up in a couple of weeks. I miss seeing everyone. Like, I can't even see you guys for like the last month. So I've been like, I'm just staring at a blank screen here. I don't know what's going on. So I'm very, very excited to be finally able to interact again and being able to see everyone. I'm very excited about that. So in 2 weeks. So I'll be there on the 25th. So I'm going to miss some of you guys. All right. I'll send you guys a picture of me. How's that? There you go. All right. So the worst part is that I'm recording all this, right? So this is what's going to go on YouTube. But yeah, go ahead. Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about it at the end, and about what we have to do, and I'll remind everybody about the due dates and stuff again. I'll make a note of it on my sheet right now, just so that way I don't forget. And if I don't talk about it, remind me of it, so that way I can do it. Yeah, I saw your email. I'm debating it. Yeah, it's fine. I'll do that. That's okay. It'll take me just a little bit of time to get everything up, but I'll try to get everything up by the latest by like Friday or Saturday. All right. Yeah, and you guys will have time to be able to, I mean, we only have 2 more weeks. And it's just a couple more discussion boards and a couple more quizzes that are extra credit and things like that. So it's nothing too drastic. The only thing I won't open up yet is going to be your final exam. But go ahead. Yeah, so the final exam is on the 1st, so it's due by the 1st. But I will open it up a couple of days before. So you guys will have exactly the same way that you guys will have about 4 days or so to be able to complete the exam, which should be enough time. Yeah, well, okay. I'll figure something out between here and there. Okay, yes. I will work on that. Hold on, give me 1 second. So if you guys have ever noticed on the audio recordings for that are on YouTube, you only hear me talk. You guys can't hear yourselves talk because I'm wearing earphones. And I was listening to one of the lectures a little while ago. Not that I liked listening to my own lectures, but I was just reviewing it because I was like, what did I even say? And I was like, who is he talking to? Like he keeps answering questions, and I'm talking about myself. I was like, it just sounds like a crazy person talking about like, oh yeah, like what? You have a question? Sure. What's your question? And I'm like, what was the question? So I get nothing. It always makes me laugh when I have these conversations and I put these on YouTube, and then I'm like, anybody who sees this stuff is probably like, something's wrong with him. Um, he just talks to himself the whole time and gives himself questions. All right. So let's continue on. So we had left off talking about the issues related with the power difference. And to be honest, I think in research, one of the biggest things that we all sometimes tend to forget about being researchers is just being simply courteous. And this is a weird thing to kind of talk about in research because, you know, I've read a lot of different research methods books. I've taught a lot of different research methods classes at different levels, at undergraduate and graduate levels. And one of the things that I think that everyone tends to forget is the aspect of just being courteous. It's one of the most simplest things for us to do, and I think it's one of the one things that we lack the most in terms of being researchers, is that we very rarely, if ever, thank our participants. And one of the things I'll talk about in your methods section in the videos that I've already posted for you guys on Blackboard is that when you guys are doing your debriefing forms, always make sure to thank your participant. Begin by thanking your participant and end by thanking your participant. Because without your participant, do you even have a research study? No, you don't. So if you don't have a research study that you're collecting data on, that means you're not going to get published, you're not going to go to conferences, you're probably not going to get tenure, you're not going to have a job, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So here, the best thing that you can do, the simplest thing is just to thank your participants. And part about being courteous is to always look at the following issues, what I like to call the 6 Ps. A professor of mine in graduate school used to talk about the 6 Ps, and these were his 6 Ps. Being prompt, being prepared, being polite, professional, private, and also being present. So as a good researcher and in life as a whole, part of what you should always do, be on time. That's always very, very important. Be on time, be earlier than just on time. Being prepared for what you need. The worst thing that you can do is, hold on guys, give me a second, let me go and get all my stuff in my office and I'll be right back. That's the worst thing because you're chewing up your own time. Being polite to your participants. Unless it's not part of the manipulation that you're supposed to be rude to them, be polite. That's the best thing that you can always do, being thankful and being polite to them. Acting in a professional fashion, not using your cell phone, not giving distractions to your participants, not getting up and walking out and distracting them in other fashions, being private with the information that they're providing for you. Many years ago, I had a research assistant that I ended up having to let go because one of the things that they did was they were collecting data and then they walked outside right after the data collection was done and the participant had left and they were talking about the participant's results. They literally had the participant packet right in front of them and they were standing there talking with one of their friends laughing about the answers that the participant had given. Like, how did they even get that one wrong? That's so dumb. I'm sorry. That's a violation of being private. You promised them that you were going to keep their information confidential or anonymous, whatever the fact was that you were going to do. And now what you're doing is you're sharing that information for no good professional reason with another person. You have to go. And I let that research assistant go, and they're a very good research assistant. But I believe in this stuff very, very well, and being present is also very, very important. Being there is beyond important. The one thing I can't stand is if I have an appointment with somebody and they don't show up, or for instance, going to your doctor's office and you're sitting there in the waiting room and, oh, the doctor's not going to come in today after all. Sorry. It's a terrible feeling. So rather, what do you want? You always want to be present, especially if you're the researcher. The participants there are willing to give you their time, willing to give you their effort and their data. The best thing that you can do is follow the 6 Ps. Any questions? Perfect. And part about being professional and being prepared is always be organized, be respectful of confidentiality, making sure that we don't make the participant feel uncomfortable unless that's part of the manipulation, and so on and so forth. Again, very, very important to always follow your 6 Ps. Now, we will turn our attention now talking a little bit about some of the issues related to doing research. And one of the biggest issues that I think we always come across in ethics is the issue of deception. And one of the reasons that the issue of deception is always so big, and especially why our IRBs always are hesitant to approve research studies that have a large amount of deception in it, is because it could potentially cause psychological distress in a participant. So if the participant doesn't know that they are answering questions related to another topic, and you're using something like active deception, where you're actually now giving them a very false cover story, you're giving them a misrepresentation of results, or the misrepresentation of the purpose of the study, or misleading them down another path, and they're answering sensitive information that you're gathering from them, that may potentially lead to them being upset, may create a reactance effect. So in other words, they may get mad at you, they may potentially hurt hurt other participants, or even a researcher. That's happened in some cases because the participants have felt that they were being mistreated in those specific situations, or not being told the truth. And part of their right is to actually receive the truth. In passive deception, we see that happen less, where participants get upset or they feel like they've been duped or anything like that. But part of what we always need to do is, if we ever do use deception, we only use deception in the most important of situations. So it's the only way that we can ever collect that data. There's no other possible way. We have to use deception, let that be active or passive deception in those specific situations. So if you're concerned with social desirability, where the participants may change their answers to look more desirable to the researcher or to other members of the group that's participating in the research study, or you feel that using deception is going to more accurately represent a real world situation, or your manipulation is going to be completely meaningless or impossible to do without the use of deception, like in the case where I was telling you about my research study, that I needed to use passive deception in that instance to being able to get to the true nature of the results that I was interested in. In those particular cases, if deception is the only way for us to be able to collect that data, fine. The APA will allow us to do that, and so will IRB if there's no other way. But we like to keep that to a minimum as best as we possibly can. The worst thing that a participant can feel is, again, feeling that feeling of being duped or being lied to. But once it is that they've completed the research study, the first thing that we do after thanking them is immediately debrief them in regards to the deception. That's one of the most important things that we always do. We thank them, and then we tell them the true nature of the study and what the purpose was. So if we were collecting information about, I don't know, let's say drug use, but we were hiding that information, and we had told them that the purpose of the information was that they were going to look at self-esteem issues and motivation issues. And then within there, we had questions related to drug use. Now, as soon as the study is done, we thank them, and we specifically tell them the true purpose of the study was to X, Y, and Z, and to get to the point associated with your drug use. Even though we did lie to you and we deceived you, you never want to say lie, because once you say you lied, everything goes bad. But once you say deceived, people are like, oh, you deceived me, but now you're good, in those particular cases. But when you say that you've deceived them, you tell them why it was necessary to deceive. That way you reduce the likelihood that they're going to be upset and that they have that psychological discomfort. Everyone good? Perfect. So again, the APA does allow us to use deception, but again, we only can use deception in specific situations where there is no other way for us to get that specific information. If there is an equally effective technique that is non-deceptive in its nature, we prefer to use the non-deceptive technique versus the deceptive technique. If there is no other better technique, then the deceptive technique can definitely be used. But if you can implement the non-deceptive technique, that would be preferable in those kinds of situations. And it's also important for us to understand that the only time that we can ever use deception is for scientific gain. If there is no real true scientific gain that comes from your research study, so there is no benefit associated with your study, number one, you shouldn't even be doing your study. And number two, you definitely should not be using deception in those particular cases. Any questions, concerns? Perfect. All right, so then what happens in the cases where we do use deception and participants may get upset? Well, aside from just getting upset and getting angry, they feel that they've gotten, again, this aspect of being duped. There's a loss of trust immediately with the researcher and with the research process. So the likelihood of them coming back at a later point in time and participating is very unlikely, or even participating with other researchers is very unlikely. And one of the first things that you'll generally find is that if you do have a participant who's gone through another procedure or another research study that's used deception, they immediately ask you about deception. They immediately do that because they don't want to have those feelings again of anger, of feeling duped in those specific situations. So they end up coming into any research situation after the fact being very, very suspicious. They don't believe anything in those particular situations. And again, that's what kind of happened with that participant that I had my very first time that I ever collected data. That the participant was asking me what I was doing, and I kept telling him that I really wasn't going to shock him or anything like that. He was in there with a lot of suspicion, didn't believe anything that I was doing, didn't believe anything that he touched because he felt he was going to get shocked immediately by everything. Maybe the worst situation would have been that he actually touched something and he actually got shocked because of static or something. That would have been horrible, now that I think of it. That would have been really, really bad. But we always want to try to minimize that aspect of creating distress in the person's behavior. And we never want them to feel that they're going through that psychological distress. And if you ever do have a participant that's getting very upset or that you feel isn't coping with understanding why it is that we had to deceive them in that specific situation, or they may end up having some type of mental break in some extreme instances. That's where sometimes we may have to call campus police, we may have to call a hospital and have them come and pick them up and provide them the correct types of services to be able to alleviate those issues in very extreme situations. Questions, concerns? Perfect. So how do we deal with deception if we're a participant or if we're a researcher? How do we go about using deception in a proper fashion? The very first thing that we always want to do is we want to receive consent for using the deception from our IRB. We want to use that consent, that we also let them know ahead of time, potentially, if especially we have a very large pool of participants, that they may be involved in some research studies and that may not be disclosed specifically what kinds of things are going to be done to them or what kind of data is going to be collected them immediately, because it may have an effect on their answers. So sometimes you may want to use this kind of blanket statement. When I was in graduate school, we had a very large research pool. This was actually one of the things that we would do. We would give this larger overall consent of information that we would say, hey, by the way, throughout the semester, you may participate in some research studies that may potentially use deception. And generally, nobody asked any questions. Nobody really said anything about it. Everyone signed an informed consent saying that they understood that they may participate in some of those research studies. And then once they got to those actual research studies, they didn't necessarily have to explain to them in their informed consent that they were going to have deception in their research study or anything like that, because again, that may change their answers. But after the fact, they were told, and sometimes they would come and tell the professors, hey, they told me I was going to do one thing and then there was another thing, and then we would have to remind them, remember, there are going to be some situations where you're going to be participating in a research study that may potentially use deception. And then they would say, oh, that's right, I forgot about it. Thank you for letting me know. And everything was okay. But sometimes you do get those participants that are very, very upset. What we also want to try to do is we also want to try to debrief immediately. This is very, very important. After the study is done, debrief them as quickly as possible and try to alleviate any of those feelings of anger, those feelings of suspicion or distrust that they may have, and explain to them fully why it was that we had to do the deceptive technique. And it's also very important for us to explain that not all researchers are going to be using deception. That's very, very important because, again, they're already losing trust in the process of doing research. So here now they go in expecting that other researchers are also going to be doing the exact same thing and deceiving them and lying to them. So here telling them that, hey, not everybody does this kind of procedure, it was only us in this specific instance, allows them to continue to create that bond of trust for them to be able to participate in the future. Questions up to now? Perfect. One of the other things that we also like to do, especially with deception, is do some role playing as an alternative. So asking the participants to behave as if they were in that possible situation. So rather than actually incorporating the issue of deception, we just say to the participant, okay, imagine yourself as a person who would consume drugs. What kind of behaviors would you have? That may be a possible situation for us to use a technique that doesn't involve using deception to get to the answers associated with drug use and behavior. So here, using that as an alternative. It's not always effective, but at least it's something that we may potentially use in the future. Questions? Perfect. Now, whenever it is that we look at the history in psychology associated with ethics, there are some research studies that really do stand out as being very important research studies that we just say to ourselves, wow, I can't believe we got away with that. We used to always say that we had this era of fun and games. And the era of fun and games was essentially where we did a lot of psychological research studies that were very borderline ethical versus unethical, and we would do so many of them that we did things that we would now consider in modern times to be highly unethical. Some of those are the examples associated with the Milgram shock experiment, right? So the obedience study that he had, where he gave participants the illusion that they were shocking another participant, when in reality they weren't shocking another participant. They were just given that illusion and going through psychological stress associated with obedience and authority figures. We also had the very famous study from Philip Zimbardo associated with his Stanford prison experiment. He's got a book that he's recently published. When I say recently published, maybe within the last 10 or 12 years, that's called The Lucifer Effect. And it essentially talks about the Stanford prison experiment in a very, very specific and graphic detail that he wrote himself, speaking on accounts of what it was that the participants went through and what it was that he observed. And it's a very good book, and I highly recommend it for any of you who are interested in that. Aside from this, the social psychological theories associated with the behavior, also the ethical contributions that it made to the field. Some other work, not necessarily in psychology, but in the medical field. For instance, we had the Tuskegee syphilis study, where participants were injected with syphilis and they weren't told that they were receiving syphilis, the syphilis disease, and they wanted to see what the effect of contracting syphilis was versus a group of individuals who didn't contract it, but they were never told that they were contracting the disease, and that was again a violation of their rights. We also have the Willowbrook hepatitis study, where again a group of individuals were given a supposed vaccine for hepatitis, and other groups of individuals were not given the vaccine. And the people who were given the vaccine, they showed improvements, while the people who weren't given the vaccine, that was a violation of their rights as well, because they should have been having a choice in terms of receiving the drug or not at a later point in time, but they were never offered that opportunity. So even though these studies demonstrated to us great work, all of these, the Tuskegee, the Willowbrook, the Milgram, and Zimbardo's prison experiment, all of us showed us great things. They're all, again, some of these more specifically like the Tuskegee and Willowbrook that are clear violations of ethics, while others are on the brink of ethical violations that now we would consider in modern times unethical. I'll post on our weekly module folder for Blackboard some links to videos to the Milgram research study and also to the Zimbardo's prison experiment, so that way you guys get a general idea of what it was that they were going through and what they did, just in case if you haven't seen it, which most of us probably have, right? Absolutely. If you haven't, it's very good work that was done within the field of psychology, but again, we never are allowed to redo some of this work. I think the one that actually has been redone in recent times has probably been the Milgram obedience study, but it's not allowed here in the US. It's been allowed, I think, in England once, and in Australia another time, in Japan, I believe. But even then, Most people don't even participate in those research studies anymore because they already know what those studies are about because it's so popular within psychology classrooms that people already know what they're getting themselves into and won't even participate in those studies anymore. And very rarely are they ever allowed to actually conduct them in those situations. One other famous study that we have was actually the Middle Mist urinal study. This is actually one of my favorite ones, and I'm just like, oh, what was wrong with us? Why would we ever do this kind of study? Like just the name alone, right, tells you like, no, this is not going to be good. With the Middle Mist urinal study, essentially what this group of researchers wanted to do is they wanted to look at the physiological effects of crowding individuals in their personal space when men were going to be urinating at a urinal. And one of the things, if you don't know this, men get very, very shy whenever it is that you're at a urinal and other people are standing next to you. Guys tend to get shy and you can't go to the restroom. And generally, person leaves and then you're perfectly fine and you're all good to go. And that's just kind of a thing that happens. And it's a very awkward situation when it's occurring. And part of what this group of researchers wanted to see was exactly that. What happens when we crowd you while it is that you're trying to go to the restroom? So what this group of researchers did, very interestingly, and very wrong, to be honest with you, they had a participant who would walk into the restroom not knowing that they were even a participant in a research study, and they would have another person who would come in who was part of the research study come in and crowd their personal space. Now, part of the problem that we experienced with the Middle Mist urinal study was, number one, they were never given an informed consent, so they were never asked, hey, do you even want to participate in this potential study? So they randomly got people who just went into a restroom to go urinate at this university. That's a huge problem. And number two, they were recorded in some instances while they were going to the restroom so that way they could then be able to fill out the results later on. So here they were recorded without their knowledge. So here again, both of those problems are very, very big issues and clear violations associated with the research study. Now, because of research studies like this, we always have the implementation of informed consents to our participants, telling them what it is that they're going to be going through, do they consent to participate or not, and also what is it that they're going to be doing in terms of data collection techniques. So you're going to be recorded, you're going to be observed, we're going to mark it down, whatever the case may be, as to what it is that an individual should be doing. Questions up to now? Everyone good? Awkward study, I'm going to be honest with you. Yeah. Nowadays, imagine if somebody did this nowadays, they'd go to jail. Yeah, they really would. Okay, so one of the things I want to talk to you guys a little bit about that it affects a lot of us now is issues with the internet. We really don't think about the internet very much in terms of the realm of ethics, but it's actually one of the up and coming fields. Now, granted, the internet as a whole has been readily available to us for a very long time, but doing research on the internet is something that's moderately new. Probably within the last 10, 12 years, we've really started expanding and wanting to use the internet as a device or a medium for us to be able to collect data on. That raised a whole lot of questions for us, a whole lot of questions, because we assume that if information is out on the internet, it's available for everybody and it's up for grabs. So in other words, you put it out on Facebook, anybody could see it, it's up for grabs for anybody to use. When in reality, we know that that's not necessarily correct. So just posting on social media doesn't mean that everyone should have access to it or that you want people to run with it or that your company that you're housing your data with, let that be Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, or anybody else, you're not giving them necessarily the authority to be able to give out your information to everybody else. Or are you? And you may not even know if you are or aren't. So part of the issues that we have related to ethics and using the internet are, number one, do people even read informed consents? And what we mean by that is, do you ever read the agreement message that comes up before you install an application or before you start an account? Very rarely. And for those of you who are sometimes, do you really read it all the way through? Sure, yeah. And absolutely, absolutely. And it should scare you. And to be honest, for a very long time, all of us, and still to this day, most of us don't even give it two thoughts about what the agreements say. We just click yes and let's go. Let's Snapchat away or whatever it is that you do. I don't know what the young guys do now, right? I don't know. One of my students the other day told me about Snapchat, and I'm totally confused, guys. I have no idea what this even means. But anyways, so when you think about that and you look at what it's like, you think to yourself, what is it that we're doing on the internet? What is it that we're giving away? There's a comedian, I can't remember, Chris Hardwick is his name. He's a comedian that he said that he had this joke about breaking up with Facebook. It was like breaking up with the crazy person. And the reason it was like breaking up with the crazy person was that, you try closing your account and Facebook would say, are you sure you want to close your account? And you would say, yes, I'm sure. And then it would say, are you really sure? You're going to lose contact with all of your friends, all these options, all your networks and all this stuff. You're going to lose everything. And then you would say, yes, again. Are you super sure? Like it still wouldn't let you go. And you're like, yes, I'm really, really sure. It's like, okay, well, I'm keeping all your information and all your pictures anyway. So even though you uploaded them, I want to delete them, I'm not going to give them back. And you're like, well, hey, they're mine. Nope, they're mine now. So essentially, like a very, very mentally disturbed person, right? So here the idea is you put it out on Facebook, it's there forever. And now these younger generations assume with things like Snapchat that, oh, it's only there for 10 seconds. And I'm like, oh, that's so sweet that you think that. I'm like, it's so nice that you think that information is really only there for 10 seconds and then, or for 30 seconds or however long it is, and then it's gone. Yeah, right. You know that they're housing that content somewhere else, somewhere on a server, deep away from wherever it is that you are, but that information is being stored somewhere. For all content that we put online, even our videos on YouTube, for instance, these videos that I place on YouTube, they will be there for eternity. No matter how much I want to delete them, somebody else has probably already taken them and uploaded them somewhere else. And actually, I did actually find that out recently. I guess somebody put a link to one of my YouTube videos on some university site in India. I was like, wow. Yep. I was like, never expected that one. But there it is. And they will be there because I put that content out there. So when you think about doing research on the internet, it's awesome for us to be able to have access to all this information and have access to all these participants. But then the problem also occurs, who are the people who are filling out the data? Who are these people who are participating in our research studies? We can share the link on Facebook, on Instagram, on Snapchat, and we can say, hey, click on the link and go and fill out the survey. It's for a friend of mine. You have no idea who's filling that out or who they're sharing that with, right? So here, you may have an 8-year-old who's being exposed to content for a research study that you had no intention that it was supposed to go to an 8-year-old, but they're on there. Or you're getting people from the wrong population to participate in your research study, but yet you assume they come from the right participation or from the right population because you're providing an incentive for them. So here, when you think about doing research on the internet, it becomes a much messier and much more complicated process. And the ethics become an even slipperier slope as to what constitutes ethical and unethical behavior. We still have fights all the time within the scientific community if we should be even doing research on the internet using online survey tools like SurveyMonkey or other types of survey sites. Some of us do and some of us don't. Some of us agree that it's unethical and that we shouldn't be doing it. And some of us agree that, hey, you know what? It's a great tool. It's available. People are out there. Gather their data. It's a risk that you're willing to take. Participants don't get a chance to ask you questions. You don't get a chance to answer questions. You don't get an opportunity to be able to monitor correctly if they're doing the study in the correct fashion. You don't know what it is that they're doing with your materials either. If they're taking them and they're putting them on other sites or they're using them for their benefits. So here it becomes a very, very slippery and scary slope. Questions up to now? Perfect. So now let's shift our attention and talk a little bit about animals. I know that talking about animals in research is always kind of a little bit of a sensitive topic, but it's important for us to talk about. Doing animal research, unfortunately, is a part of research. It's a part of it. We all don't have to engage in animal research. I personally don't engage in animal research. I'm not a big fan of animal research, But on a professional side, I see the benefit of doing animal research. Do I accept animal research? Absolutely. Do I want animal research to continue? Absolutely, because it gives us great knowledge. And it also doesn't put humans in jeopardy. A lot of the things that we do with animals in the name of science and in the name of research is because we're not willing to give that risk to humans. Everyone with me so far? Now, only a very, very small portion of psychological research is actually done with animals. And most animal research that's done is research that is not going to hurt the animals in any way. That we use them for models for human behaviors. That's why we call them animal models. Okay? So most of the time these animals have been bred in captivity. They're purchased for scientific use. They are used in research studies. There's no problems with them. They've been given normal tasks that just replicate human behavior, and we're using them for human purposes, but under more controlled situations, under very strict situations. And if there is no problems with the animals, and they're not going to have any trouble adapting back into the population, they are not going to be eliminated. Everyone with me? In other words, if the animal may potentially be carrying a disease, maybe potentially changing the genetic makeup of the population, we never want to reintroduce that animal back into the population. So this idea that when animals are done, you want to release them. We're going to go break into a lab, we're going to open up the cage, we're going to let them out, they're going to be free. That's the worst thing that you can actually do. Because you have no idea what that animal may potentially carry and what it may be introducing into the population of that animal, into that species. Everyone with me so far? So rather, what do we do? In the case where they're not going to be euthanized or killed in this specific instance, generally they're given up for adoption purposes, or they're given up to other researchers to continue on down the line using those animals until they finally decease. Okay, so we value the life of that animal very, very much. Even in the case where an animal is going to be euthanized. And the only reason we would ever euthanize them is, again, that they're carrying some disease, they've been given some drug, something that's going to potentially change the makeup of the population. So even giving them a drug, caffeine, nicotine, things of that nature, unfortunately the animal has to be euthanized in those specific cases. In those specific cases, very strict protocols need to be taken. Now, the association that governs the use of animals in university settings is actually called IACUC. IACU. IACUC. And what IACUC does is they essentially look, and it's IACUC, sorry. So IACUC. And the reason that we have IACUC, what is it? I'm trying to think of the name, what the acronym stands for. It is the Institutional Animal and Care Use Committee that we have. IACUC's purpose is to make sure that the research that you're doing with animals is, number one, ethical, number two, justifiable. And this is why I tell you guys, it's very hard to do animal research. And one of the reasons for that is because we value the animal life. Very, very important. So it is not in the interest of science to just be euthanizing animals and using animals for scientific gain and purpose every single time. The worst thing you could ever think of doing is replicating a research study that's already been published using animals. If that's what your goal is, you're never going to get approved. Or if you're wanting to make a minor variation, more than likely it's not going to happen because there's not enough scientific gain that comes from using that animal, especially if the animal is going to be euthanized at the end. Everyone with me so far? So here we value animal life very, very much. It's so important for us that part of ethics is making sure that we have ethical behavior in research settings for animals and humans as well. And the scientific definition of psychology is the scientific study of humans and animals. So we value them very, very much, very important. Questions up to now? Perfect. So why is animal research actually done in psychology then? One of the reasons, again, like I mentioned, is that we don't want to actually put humans at risk in certain situations. And it's very important research that needs to be done. So for instance, when you look at a lot of the addiction research that we have out there in psychology, a lot of it is actually done with animal research because it's much more feasible to put the animal at risk rather than the human at risk. And again, we're not saying that it's fair to do that, but rather that's the choice that we're willing to make as a scientific community. And now, not in all instances will those studies be approved. So it's no guarantee that they will actually be approved, but yet that's the risk that we're willing to take, putting the animal at risk rather than the human in those specific instances. It's also a lot easier for us to do research studies with animals versus humans because we can easily access those animals. We can purchase the animals from a breeder, especially if we want them to have a specific gene or a specific makeup or a specific breed, or if we want them to already come with a specific disease at the genetic level or whatever the case may be. We can have the breeders already stipulate that for us. Out in the real world, that's very hard for us to get our hands on those types of populations with humans, but with animals it's a lot easier, especially for instance with like cancer or diabetes research. You're not going to sit there and try to give the animal diabetes once it is that you purchase them, but rather they can be given diabetes at a genetic level once it is that they're actually born, so that way they can then be used for the purposes of research in those specific instances, so that way we can do our adequate research in those instances. Doing animal research is actually quite expensive as well. You can have animals range pretty much from any price. Rats are about $10 or so. I would probably even say it's a little bit higher now, probably about $15. Monkeys, for instance, that really are not really used very much anymore, but they would also range about $600 back in the day. So as you can imagine, we used to do a lot of research all the way from rats to dogs to cats to pigeons to guinea pigs to monkeys to chimpanzees to gorillas. Anything that you can possibly think of as an animal was generally used for psychological purposes at some point in time or another. Questions up to now? And again, it's not necessarily something that we want, but it is, unfortunately, in these specific cases, something that we do. And we're not ashamed that we do it because it's given us a lot of information about human behavior. But at the same time, we wish that we really wouldn't have to do it if there was an option to not doing it in those specific cases. Now, it also allows us to study, like I've mentioned before, irreversible effects. For instance, if we're doing brain research and we need to look at specific brain areas, and we can take slices of the brain at specific instances, or for instance, creating certain ablations or lesions, or implanting certain things in certain locations of the brain, creating certain types of diseases, the issues associated with isolation or with crowding or socialization are also very, very important for us, and a lot of them do cause irreversible effects that we don't want to actually put on humans and put that kind of stress or that physical change or emotional or psychological change as well. But again, the findings that we have are very, very important based on what it is that they can provide us in an understanding of human behavior, not just of animal behavior in those specific instances. Now, what are some major concerns that we always want to look at with animal research? Number one is the issues of justification of the study. What is it that we're going to be gaining from the work that's going to be done? So again, that cost-benefit analysis is going to be very important. The cost that comes with using animals is already very, very high, not just because of the actual monetary cost, but also because we realize in some instances they're going to be kept in captivity for the remainder of their lives, or in other instances that they may be given away for adoption purposes to families as pets in some instances, or that they may be euthanized. So again, there is a very, very important cost that comes with that. Number two, what kind of care is going to be given to the animals? They need to be given a humane care, professional care, outside of the manipulation, which is very, very important for us to understand that we have the manipulation and then also just the basic quality care and professionalism that we're going to be giving the animals as well. And also, what's the purpose of the animal itself as a whole? Is it going to be just for educational purposes? Is it going to be for research purposes, and they might potentially have to give their life for research? What is it that we're doing with the animals are very, very important in terms of our understanding of using animals for the purposes of research. Questions so far? Perfect. So the last couple of things that I want to talk about are issues related a little bit more generally to behaviors that we tend to do as professionals, outside of just doing research, but just ourselves as professionals. And one of the things that we kind of happen upon the most is the unethical use of knowledge. So the aspects associated with plagiarism, authorship credit, duplication of publications, falsifying credentials, or even the fabrication of data are very, very big issues that we always see related to the issues of blatant dishonesty or this aspect of fraud. We see this happen quite frequently where people falsify credentials to make themselves look better for a job opportunity or for employment opportunities with universities or to provide certain types of services. Just the other day, I was telling another faculty member that it was very interesting that my wife called me and she said, hey, you know what? Someone just applied to work here at our office. And I was like, oh, okay, that's fine. And she said, you may know them. They got their psychology degree, at the university where you used to be at. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, what's the person's name? And they said the name. And I said, oh, yeah, I kind of remember that person. I think it was towards the end of their career there that I had met them as a student. And she goes, oh, yeah, it's great. So how did she do, when she was getting her master's? And I said, master's? I said, that student doesn't have a master's. Are you sure? And I said, yeah, I'm really sure. Like, I was there when that student left. I was in charge of the graduate department there for psychology for 2 years before I left. And that student never came through my doors. And I've been gone only for about 3 months. And she goes, oh, are you serious? And I said, you know what? Give me that student's number. So I called the student and I said, hey, this is Dr. Lagarza. I have a concern. I got your resume. Somebody forwarded me your resume and it says here that you have an MS degree. And I said, number one, the degree that's offered at that university is not even an MS, it's an MA. So they even got the initials wrong. I was like, come on. I was like, if you're gonna lie, at least try, right? And I said, it says here that you got an MS. I said, you don't. Oh, I'm really sorry. I meant to put BS. And I was like, the degree that we offer at the university there isn't even a BS, it's a BA. So none of your initials are right. And they said, oh, I'm really sorry. It's because I got confused and so on and so forth. I said, you know what? You need to take it off and you need to send me a new updated Vita. And I have nothing to do with the student anymore, nothing. And the student, I made them take it off and then send me their Vita again. And I said, all right, this is the one that if I ever get this back from anybody, this is the one I should be seeing. I said, never put that back on. So again, that issue of trying to resolve the conflict between ourselves first. If that would have not happened, and I would still find out that that student still was reporting that, I would have to take that higher up. Wherever it is that I would have that higher up. Let that be through the university where she was at, or let that be through APA, so that way they can look into it and contact that person, whatever the case may be. You do everything in your power to rectify the situation because we will not stand for this. Everyone with me so far? Absolutely perfect. Also, the aspect of duplication of publications. This is a big one that we find in research all the time. People will publish their articles, and then what they'll do is they'll change little parts of their publication. They'll change 5%, 10% of their paper, and then they'll submit it for another publication at another journal. So they know it'll get accepted into a journal because the original one already got accepted. They'll make a couple minor changes, change the title here and there, and then they'll send it through, see if it gets published again. That's not right because you're using the same data to publish again, unless you're looking at a different component than what you were looking at in the other publication. Same data, different issues that you're looking at, not a problem. Different article completely. But if it's essentially the same thing, you don't do it. This actually happened, not to me personally that I did this, but somebody approached me a couple of years ago and they said, hey, we have a research article that we would like for you to work on. And I was like, okay, cool, I can help you guys with it. And they said, well, essentially the article's already written. It already got published. I'm like, then what do you need me for? And they said, well, we're just going to change some things around and then we're going to send it to, we want to send it out for publication. You can be second author on it. And I said, well, we can't do that. That's duplication of publications. No. We already talked to other people in the field and they said that if we change 30% of the article, we're okay. 30%? That seems like an arbitrary number. I would have said something like 28% or something. I don't know. I was like, 30%? I'm like, what are you going to change? And they were like, well, don't worry about it. Don't worry. Just work on it. I said, no. So I'm not going to work on it. I'm sorry. And they got really upset at me, and they were like, this is a great opportunity. We already know it's going to get published. You're just going to change some things around and we'll be good. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to touch it with a 10-foot pole. You can do it. Go for it. Have blatant dishonesty. Good for you. Not going to happen. Good thing was that article never got published. If it would have gotten published, I would have called him. I would have called him out on it. Absolutely. I mean, and here when we think about it, it infuriates us when these kinds of things happen, because imagine the work that you're doing. Imagine the work that you guys are doing, the effort that you're putting in. It's essentially cheating, right? So if you're studying, you're doing all the hard work and you're performing well because you're putting in that effort, and now suddenly you got this person who's taking the shortcut to get there and just double dipping, and they're falsifying credentials and they're doing this and doing that. They're not giving authorship what the authorship is due. That becomes problematic, and it makes us upset and it makes us very angry. So here we take a lot of responsibility, and we're very quick to point things out whenever it is that we feel that something is an ethical infraction or not. Questions, concerns? Perfect. Now, this leads us to the following question. What's questionably ethical, right? So this comes up a lot. Is it really unethical? I get that question a lot. And since people know I teach the ethics classes from time to time, I would get this question all the time. When I taught it at my other university, I taught ethics all the time. People would come up to me from different departments and they would be like, hey, you're the ethics guy. And I'm like, all right, I guess I am the ethics guy. And they would say, I have a question. And I'm like, if you have a question about a behavior that you're doing, the answer is you shouldn't do it. That's about as easy as it is, right? It's like someone who cheats on their spouse. Is it really cheat? Yeah. If you're asking yourself that question, yeah. It totally is. There's no way around it. Like, there's not. Or defending, for instance, plagiarism. Is it really plagiarism? Yeah. Yeah, if you're asking those questions, it really is. Like, don't ask those kinds of questions. Faulty experimental designs, for instance. Fully knowing that your experimental design has flaws, major flaws, that you're unreliable, that you're unvalid, and still using those methodologies, that is very, very unethical. Because you know that there are better techniques out there, and just because, for whatever the reason, because you don't want to spend the money, you don't want to reach out to somebody else who has it, whatever the case may be, you didn't use it, it's not really questionably ethical, it's unethical. Because you're hurting the community, you're hurting society. Again, going to that aspect of fidelity and responsibility. You have an obligation to society, to your community, scientific and population-wise, to make sure that you're doing the best work that you possibly can. Dealing in a faulty fashion with data. So, for instance, eliminating participants that are questionable. This is a big one. I had this happen a couple of years ago where a researcher came up to me and was like, hey, dude, can you help me out with some data analysis? Yeah, man, I'll sit down with you and I'll help you out. Buy me some coffee. And we had some coffee. We're having fun. We're looking at the data. And as we're going through the data, the researcher said, hey, you know what? The one that's on line number 6, look at that. You know, they left one question blank. Delete that one. Just because they didn't answer one question out of 100? What's wrong with you? Oh, no, it's going to mess with my results. No, what? No, it's not. And what researchers tend to do, they start trimming data. Start trimming that data. It's like, again, like I mentioned before, buying a piece of meat, right? You buy a piece of meat, you trim off that fat, so that way you're left with a good piece of meat. That's what all researchers want to do. We're going to trim off all that data. We're going to trim off all that bad stuff, so that way you're only left with the good stuff. The problem, as we trim, we start trimming off the good stuff too. And sometimes that's not the real picture. The real picture comes with fat and all, doesn't it? If you're doing your job correctly as a researcher, you would never have faulty data. You would never have to trim if you're getting the right population to participate. Because that's what people will argue. Oh, well, sometimes you get participants who come in and participate who you think represent the population, but they really don't, so they become outliers. So you trim them out. Sounds to me like if you have a faulty experimental design. Sounds to me like you need a little better training on how to sample from the population, because we're not supposed to have that problem. Everyone with me so far? But in other instances, hey, sometimes you got to trim data. I don't know. I use a lot of reaction time data in my research. I trim data. Even though I think all at the same time, you really shouldn't, but I have to trim. Because sometimes a participant misses a trial. Sometimes they weren't even looking and we notice that they weren't looking, so we're going to delete that trial. And most of the time, we try to run multiple data analysis techniques. One of them that's got all the faulty data, one of them that doesn't have the faulty data. If we see that there's this huge discrepancy within our results, we got a problem. If there's no difference, then don't worry about it. You're perfectly fine. There's ways around it. Distorting graphs and figures. This is a big one. People will show these bar graphs and look at this huge difference between your groups. And then what do you have? A difference of 0.2. What happened there? And then you look at the scale, and the scale goes from a 4 to a 4.5. What? Why don't you start it at 0? And I ask, well, what's the lowest value? What's the highest value? Well, the lowest value is a 0. The highest value was a 9. And your graph shows me from 4 to 4.5. Come on, man. What's wrong with your graphs here? Fix them. Big part because it tells the story. Again, pictures are worth 1,000 words. Making sure that we understand what the purpose of our studies are. And understanding that just because they don't coincide with our thoughts or our beliefs or the hypothesis that we even had doesn't mean that we're wrong. This happens a lot. I get researchers and I get students and I get graduate students and everybody who comes and tells me, oh, we were wrong. Our study failed. What do you mean it failed? Oh, my hypothesis wasn't supported. Doesn't sound to me like it failed. It just meant that you predicted the wrong thing. It happens. You think you flip a coin and you think it's going to land on heads and it lands on tails. It doesn't mean that you're wrong. It doesn't mean that you failed at life. Maybe your techniques are wrong. Go back to the drawing board. Let's try to find out what's going on. So here, making sure that you understand what to do with your work is very important. Also, reporting piecemeal experiments. This is a big thing too for us in research. This always is borderline, is it okay or not to do? People will do a larger study, 3 or 4 research studies, and then they'll publish individual parts. Part 1, publish another part 2, then publish part 3, and then publish part 4, all of it together. Come on, man. It's one study and you got 4 publications out of it. Come on. Again, those become questionably ethical. Questions up to now? Perfect. The last thing here I want to leave you with, making sure that you understand that whenever it is that we do research to the best of our abilities, in the best ethical fashion, in the best quality that we can possibly do it. Because part of what we're doing is making sure that what we put out there into the world, what we put out there into the community is the best quality work. So here, reorganizing your work in different forms. So that way it tells a different story. And maybe it tells a better story than the original way that you had it structured. That may be okay, depending on what it is that you're doing. Reformulating, reconceptualizing your theory, but using the same data may be okay if it fits the theory, if it fits the purpose. Leaving out certain experiments or certain analyses that don't really add much, or for instance, that you feel, hey, you know what? I don't really feel that they tell a good story or that they tell the story at all, or that the data I collected, it may have been a little shady. I'd rather not put that in there. All right. But make a note of it. Maybe go back, clean it up, work on it, and then include it in there. Because here what we're trying to do is we're trying to contribute to the community as best as we possibly can. Everyone good so far? Perfect. All right, so that wraps up our discussion associated with ethics. Any major overarching questions or concerns that you guys have with ethics? Perfect. Ethics, pretty straightforward, right? Pretty simple. Absolutely. We're all ethical. All right. So let's talk a little bit, guys, about your method section. The method section, I have moved the due date on the calendar. It says the 14th. I moved it to the 23rd. So not this Sunday, but next Sunday, right? Yes. Okay. So next Sunday. Okay. So for your method section, I've already gone ahead and recorded the video. I've posted it on Blackboard for you. You guys should have access to it. You should be able to see the sample materials, the grading rubric, all the requirements that I'm asking you for your method section. Your method section is pretty straightforward. It's made up of 3 parts: your participants, your materials, and your procedure section. Those are your 3 parts to your method section. Okay? The method section is probably not going to be very long. It's probably going to be about 1.5 pages to maybe 2 pages, depending on what you're doing. It's going to be a pretty quick write. Everyone good? Perfect. Okay. Everything, again, is proposed. So in other words, your participants, who will your participants be? How many participants do you want? What materials will you be using? For the materials, I've given you all also sample materials that you guys can use as your template. Your sample materials include your informed consent, survey template, and also your debriefing template that you guys can use. Use those templates, please. Use them to your benefit now and in the future, whenever it is that you want. They're there for you guys to use. Now, for your materials, you guys do have to have materials for your research study. In other words, if you're saying that you're going to use Rosenberg's self-esteem questionnaire, give me a copy of Rosenberg's self-esteem questionnaire. If you can't get your hands on a copy of Rosenberg's self-esteem questionnaire, but it's in a book, type out the questions on a Word document, format it correctly as if the participant were going to receive it. Everyone with me so far? If you're going to use an fMRI machine as one of the materials, don't give me an fMRI machine. I would like one, right? But give me a picture of one. So say in Appendix B, you can see the fMRI machine that we would use, and give me a picture of it. Remember, you guys can have as long as a document as you want. Everything's going to be submitted online, so it doesn't really matter in terms of length. Everyone good? The only thing that we're going to do after your method section, we're going to do one other thing, and it's going to be your abstract, and then we're going to be done for the semester. Everyone good? Perfect. No, the abstract, don't worry about the abstract right now. We're going to worry about that a little bit later. Okay, we'll talk about that next week. And the abstract will be a very, very quick writing sit down that you'll have. I mean, it's 150 words and you're fine. I wanted us to be able to do that, but to be honest, I think with losing our day with 4th of July really threw us off. So I think at this point we'll stop with the method section. I think we'll be good. I think you guys will be fine with that. Just do it as a separate document right now. Yeah. In practice, it would all go together and it would be at the tail end. You're absolutely correct. But for now, don't worry about that. All right. Everyone good? All right, perfect. If you guys have any questions about your method section, do feel free to email me or call me. I'm always happy to answer your questions. I've given you guys plenty of samples, everything like that, so that way you guys can see exactly the correct format that we need to do everything in. Absolutely. I'm going to go ahead and open it up today. All right, guys. Yes, because I haven't posted it yet. I'm going to post it up right now. Yeah, I'll post up the extra. It's extra credit, so you don't have to do it if you don't want to. It's extra credit. All quizzes are extra credit. All right, have a good rest of your day, guys. All right, good night, guys. Bye-bye. Yep. On Thursday, yeah. That's my hope, to get everything back to you guys on Thursday. Thank you, guys. Have a good rest of your night, and I'll see you all next week. Bye-bye.